Good evening, Zambia. Good evening, Ichalo. Mwa Shibukeni, mwa Ukabwanji, mwa Bombeni, mwa Ikareni. Good evening. It's another Thursday, and we are back on BOMA Bantu for a detailed conversation on some of the things that the government is doing through its agencies and sometimes through its ministries and institutions. So this evening, we're privileged to be speaking to Dr. Gabriel Pollen, who will be speaking to us on the works and the duty of the DMMU. DMMU, Disaster Management and Mitigation Unity, has been a buzzword or institution whenever there is a crisis or there is a disaster in the country. And once again, they are back in the spotlight as we address the cholera challenge. Doc, good morning. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Very good. Thank you very much for accepting to speak to us. And what we hope to achieve, obviously, through this program is to share more light on what your institution does and what should the expectations of the people be when it involves DMMU. And basically just to appreciate the work that you do. So I'll ask you to share what is it that DMMU does? What is it that you do every single day as an institution?
No, thank you so much for having me and for using this platform to broadcast the the role of the institution called Disaster Management and Mitigation Unit and what it does broadly within the context of the different services that the government provides for the public. I think the more important question there to understand is, first of all, in its current form, the DMMU comes into existence based on Management Act number 12 of 2010, which specifies very clearly that the DMMU is a department in the office of the Vice President. So it draws its powers from the Act. The Act stipulates precisely what the different roles, responsibilities, the realm of responsibility of this department is. It's headed by a national coordinator. And essentially, a DMMU is an emergency wing of government. It responds to, and not just any emergencies. These emergencies are guided by the Act. And then maybe just to, add some context to this conversation and add some insight. I think I'll just read from the Disaster Management Act in terms of what the meaning of a disaster is, because what that will do is to basically help people understand what a disaster is, and then also what type of events or incidents would respond to and why we respond to a selection of those incidents. According to the Disaster Management Act number 13, of 2010, disaster means an event that is associated with the impact of a human-induced or natural hazard which causes a serious disruption in the functioning of a community or society, causing widespread human, material, or environmental losses which exceeds the ability of the community or society to cope with the hazard using its own resources. So very, very clearly here, when you think about the roles of the DMMU, it has to really be based on the scope of the incident that has occurred, the scope of the event, and to what extent that event has affected a given particular locality. And based on the Act, you see that this event must disrupt the normal functioning of a community to the extent that that community does not have the ability, using their own resources, to respond to that particular event. So I think that in general, that's what I'll put out there as a guiding principle with respect to the kinds of incidents or events that we respond to. And you'd appreciate, obviously, you've noticed that there have been some accidents, road traffic accidents, that have been considered as disasters. And the threshold for on whether or not the DMMU will come in would depend on the scale of devastation. I mean, there are road traffic accidents almost on a daily basis. Find their fatalities, but when does the DMMU come in? So this must be understood within the context of the definition of what a disaster is. So as the emergency wing of government, we intervene in situations where the normal functioning of a given sector is beyond the sector's capacity, and additional support is required from within the government itself. And it's the entity called the DMMU coordinates all the different areas of government. So the DMMU operates in every sector, operates in every corner of this country, and there's no restriction upon in terms of the sectors and so forth. And that is why you see that if the emergency has something to do with a public health emergency, the DMMU will be there. If it's an emergency that has to do with the occupational health and safety, even within the context of the mines, depending upon the wide-scale nature of the incident, you find the DMMU is there. If the event has to do with the threat on food security situation of a country, and that's beyond the capacity at that point for the sector ministry to respond, you find that the DMMU will be there. So in general, that's a kind of broad understanding of how the DMMU finds itself and finds relevance within the landscape of government public services.
So just last week we had an incident in Senseli in Chingola. What would you describe as how would you describe that situation that we found ourselves in as a country, relating to your day-to-day work as DMMU?
Yeah, so essentially because of the numbers of casualties and fatalities that were involved, the appropriate wing of government that then had to come on board to mobilize the different capacities of the state was the DMMU. And you saw us on site. But there have been incidents where one or two miners would succumb to their casualties or succumb to some misfortune, and you've never seen the DMMU there. So it really depends on the scale of devastation, and to the extent that this scale affects a large quantity of assets of individuals as well. So the role that we played in that context was firstly to understand that the recovery, the search, rescue and recovery operations were beyond the capacity of the given ministry that would be in charge of the mining operations. And therefore, different agencies of the government had to be mobilized to try and help in the deployment and utilization of those capacities. And that's where the government calls the DMMU, to just put everyone at the same table and find a solution.
Here we are grappling with the reality of cholera in Lusaka mostly, but also in some parts of the country. How is it looking from your end as DMMU?
So again, this basically demonstrates the complementary and interdependence of the government itself. The government should be seen as one organism with different specialized sections that work in a very specialized way, but can be coordinated and deliver public services in a more comprehensive and robust manner. So what you might want to appreciate from there is that the sector ministry responsible for the treatment or the clinical side is the Ministry of Health. But because of the nature of the threat, the public health threat associated with cholera, it's beyond really the capacity of the Ministry of Health itself, because it involves bringing on board different players and different stakeholders, including those beyond the government itself. So what happened in relation to cholera is that the government, through the coordination of the Disaster Management Mitigation Unit, has mobilized all the different capacities across a broad spectrum of specialized sections. And with the coordination that the DMMU is doing, is that we have come up with response pillars. And what these response pillars are doing is guiding a comprehensive and robust an effective response strategy. So the first pillar, for example, in our response to cholera is the case management. Obviously, as you'd appreciate, this is something that the president has been really emphasizing, is that we must do everything possible to save lives. So in the event that individuals present themselves with cholera, the medical products are readily available. So the case management side is being led by the Ministry of Health. That's the lead ministry. And what that is doing is that the Ministry of Health is treating patients and ensuring that all medical products are readily available to support the idea of case management. But the Ministry of Health is also being supported by the DMMU, by the Ministry of Water Development and Sanitation, by the Ministry of Local Government, being supported by the Ministry of Defense. Then outside of the case management pillar, you will see that we also have the provision of clean drinking water. And essentially there, the government is providing fresh drinking water to the hotspot areas, targeted and selected areas where we're reporting largest levels of vulnerability and exposure to risks of cholera. So in those areas, the government, through the leadership of the Ministry of Water Development and Sanitation, is installing 10,000 liters. Hundreds and hundreds of water tanks are being installed around Lusaka alone, with the support from the Defense Forces, with the Zambia National Service on board as well, relying on government capacities and skills, as well as support from the private sector. Outside of the solid waste management, outside of the water and sanitation pillar, or maybe before I move away from that, we also have the Ministry of Water Development and Sanitation that is emptying pit latrines across these different places. So as you know, it's a painstaking, long, arduous process because of the nature of the pit latrines themselves and the requirement to have substantial amount of labor on ground to do that, because you know these pit latrines are found in places where vehicles can't access them, and you need people to go there and to literally take all the waste out. So this is a very, very difficult undertaking, but the government is indeed dedicated and committed to ensuring that we do the best that we can in that context. But then we have the solid waste management pillar, which is being led by the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development. And here, the focus primarily has been to clear all the historical waste. So there is historical waste in strategic places like markets and so forth. So, but then also to promote general cleanliness of the environment, taking away all the refuse that's really an eyesore, and also present itself as a conducive environment for the proliferation and spread of the vector. So we appreciate the work that the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development is doing, but then we are also calling upon support from the sector, from the communities themselves as contributors to that pollution, but also as part of the solution to complement the efforts that the government has put in place. Outside of the solid waste management pillar, we have the pillar of risk communication and community engagement. Under here, we have the Ministry of Information and Media, that is engaging different media platforms, including social media, including television, including radio, including print, to firstly sensitize the communities about the preventive options available to them, but also sensitize the communities about the different activities and initiatives that the government is putting in place in order to mount a robust response to the cholera threat. And outside of the Ministry of Information and Media, as you'd appreciate, we also have the Ministry of Youth, Sport and Arts, through the National Arts Council that has engaged various artists who've gone into the communities, who are speaking to these communities. And then, basically bring about issues around sensitization of what their role is as communities in the pollution, in polluting the environment, but also in preventive interventions and issues around hygiene and so forth. Then outside of the risk communication community engagement pillar, we have the logistics and transport component, where the government has mobilized over 78 vehicles across a spectrum of different government institutions and ministries to support the operations around contact tracing, and also to support operations that would be required in order to transport patients and, unfortunately, bodies as well. But in general, you can appreciate that it's a very complex system that the government has put in place, but because of the coordination angle, all the ministries are speaking to each other. We're avoiding duplication and ensuring that resources are optimized and deployed in the best way possible. I think that's a broader sort of multi-sectoral understanding of, the cholera response, but you see that multi-sectoral approach is really a key strategy that the government deploys in responding to the different types of hazards and threats and risks.
What you've shared on the parts that government is playing and obviously continues to play. I would want you to share on what is expected of the people, because I think this is an issue that originates and starts with the people and in the community where our people spend their lives and spend their time. What is it that is expected from the members of the society, from members of our communities? What is it that you would want or you'd ask that they do to respond and partner with government in addressing this particular challenge?
And I mean, it's a very, very important question. I mean, it's a question of responsibility as well. And I think it's a question of reminding each other that we have each a role to play. Even as, your show has this title of BOMA and BANTU. We are human beings. Essentially, we're part of these communities and at risk. And as you'd appreciate, we face the same challenges as everybody else. We live in the exact same community that everybody else does. But the important thing is to understand that there's an aspect of personal responsibility as far as cholera is concerned. I mean, it's not the government that has dumped waste into the drainage. It's not the government that is clogging the drainage. It's ourselves, the people, who are doing that. So it's a responsibility of ourselves to also ensure that we live in a very clean environment, that we protect ourselves, that we encourage very, very good hygiene. And I think that's the message that we're trying to spread out there, that it's an issue of values. And I think within even the religious Christian context, you understand that cleanliness is next to godliness. That's what we preach. And what we're saying there is, let's try and promote good hygiene as part and parcel of our national values, and especially of Zambia as a Christian nation.
One would ask, and I'm sure as we begin to get to the questions from our viewers, one would ask, what is the long-term response to this particular problem? What is it that we can do? And I want you to answer this from the perspective of government, but also from the perspective of the public. What is it that we should do to make sure that we do not fall into this situation next year?
That's a very, very important question. And I mean, I've seen a lot of commentary around that to say this looks like an exercise in futility in terms of what it is that we're doing, in futility in the sense that see you next year, same time, because there's pretty much not much being done in order to ensure that we eradicate the cholera threat. But you appreciate that the status of the most vulnerable places in terms of their exposure to risk is really a function of informal settlements. And you see that the majority, and Zambia is one of the most urbanized African countries, sub-Saharan African countries, with a very large, almost 50% of the population living in urban areas, and the largest chunk of that living in informal settlements. And this is a problem that has affected the country for decades, even way before independence. And you see that there's been substantial population growth over the years from just around 3 million or slightly less than that in 1964 to around 20 million today. And unfortunately, you find that most people live in informal settlements. And it's in these informal settlements that lack proper infrastructure, proper drainage infrastructure, proper sanitation infrastructure, where you find that it's a conducive ground for the growth of the vector itself, of the cholera bacteria. And I think the long-term approach is to think developmentally, which is to say, what are our developmental ambitions and what kind of communities would we like to create? So there are two aspects to this. This is from the urban planning perspective, where the government takes the lead in ensuring that any new residential growth is underpinned by proper urban planning that puts a premium on proper drainage and sanitation and basic amenities for the communities there. And then secondly, enforcement of that urban planning by ensuring that, one, the government enforces strict standards in urban development, but also communities themselves adhere to these standards. So most of the informal settlements, you find that people just wake up and they start building without planning permission. And it has been decades of absence of proper enforcement conditions there. So even as we think about replanning urban developments, let's think about doing it in such a way that it's underpinned by the proper standards that would envisage. So it's really a very difficult one, because this really is a function of the structural transformation more broadly that would like the country to undergo developmentally. But that structural transformation really must bring to the fore proper residential settlements for the people. And as you see, I mean, even when you look at medieval Rome, for example, it suffered with cholera. You look at London, for example, it suffered with cholera. That was hundreds of years ago. But as the cities were being replanned, as development was taking place, they were placing a premium on proper planning of drainages and sanitation, because it's in improper places where you find that cholera finds itself to thrive quite well. So the long-term plan really is to imagine a situation where we have residential developments that are based upon the correct building standards and urban planning that focuses on the best practices, the proper benchmarking. There's been a presidential directive already, for example, to say we need to start thinking around benchmarking and how, for example, Southeast Asian countries, the Asian tigers, for example, have been able to eliminate the public health threats, and how they've done that within the shortest possible period of time. So this is a conversation that's going on. Just very recently, I put up a post on my Facebook page where I was trying to engage the public to say, what are some of your radical views around what is realistic and what can be thought of as something that you would imagine could be essentially useful for this kind of development, and you get some pretty interesting responses there. Very, some of them are utopic in the sense that they're not realistic within the context of the existing socio-political nuances that we find ourselves in, where we live in a democratic space, and we have to be alive to the differences in opinions and ways of doing things, but also do things in the most judicious and responsible way that we can engage these communities by also bringing about ownership from their perspective. I think that's the long answer to the question that you asked, but basically I think what this demonstrates is the complexity of the problem, and the fact that the solution would depend largely on the developmental ambitions of our country as we aim to grow our economy, because disasters have the potential to derail a country, because it diverts resources away from developmental aspirations towards response in order to save lives.
Thank you, Doc. I want us to get to start responding to some of the questions that are already coming from our viewers, and I'll be showing them to you, and then hoping that we respond to them one by one. So this first one comes from Roka, who says, Mandevu needs help with this cholera. We need good drainage system, DMMU. I think this should also be considered.
Absolutely, absolutely agree. Absolutely agree that we need good drainage systems. And I think in my submission, I touched upon that to say that we need conducive environments for our people, and drainage essentially is one of those things which takes away contaminated water. It enables people to live in an environment that is safe and properly secure for them. So that's something that indeed has to be done. And as you know, the government over decades has been grappling with the drainage challenge. If you know about the project of the Millennium Challenge Account, and that continuous engagement. And there's a cabinet directive under His Excellency the President that we need to drain, for example, Lusaka. We need to drain all these places. And all this is being activated. Some people would appreciate that there's been some works that have been ongoing on Pongozi Road in Kamala South, for example. And the Zambia National Service has been on hand even before the dry season. And the clinic that was vacated now, you can see that the place is getting dry and so forth. There are challenges. Because there's been decades of poor planning. So the realistic perspective of it is that they're not going to be solved overnight, but it will be solved incrementally over time. But what's important is to see that the right steps are being taken. So I agree with Roka that drainage is a challenge that needs to be addressed, and the government is seriously looking into that and has already started to implement.
Thank you, Doc. This second one is coming from John Don Mulenga. Says, it is disheartening that every year we find ourselves discussing topics such as raising awareness about cholera. I'm curious to know what actions your department is taking to ensure a lasting change in people's mindset.
Again, another very, John, thank you very much for that. That's another very important submission. It is indeed disheartening, and you can be dispirited to see that this is an annual ceremony. We are taking very active measures this time around to bring awareness in these communities. Like as I've indicated, one of the key pillars we've created is a risk communication and community engagement pillar. And from that pillar, you see that there are different players on board. Our role as DMMU is to coordinate the different capacities of the government primarily. And we can see that the National Guidance and Religious Affairs Department in the Office of the Vice President has also come on board. We've engaged the church. The church is sending these messages out to communities. We have the Ministry of Youth, Sport and Arts that's also engaging communities through the platform of the artists, their capacities and talents that the artists have to speak the language that communities can understand and appreciate. But we also have, in general, traditional media, and this is through the Ministry of Information and Media. But at the same time, we're depending on you, John, as a member of the community, to help the government spread this word. And let's hold hands and ensure that we continue to do the best that we can.
Thank you, Doc. This one is coming from Mukukamlenga. Says, since this is a national crisis, why can't DMMU lobby for funds in next budget so that they can construct drainages even in the slums?
No, thank you very much again. And I think that has already been done, and funds are being mobilized and funds will be deployed where they're required. But we must appreciate that the problem at hand in value terms is quite substantial and will take time before we can come to a position where we say that we've completely sorted out everything. But you will continue to see works ongoing in the different strategic places, and that's something that's been looked into very, very seriously.
There's an interesting proposition here. Somebody says, Dr. Pollen, that looks like it's you on the DP there. Dr. Pollen, we have youths like Martin Mulenga and Davis who are helping our country in their activism and cleaning without proper working materials. Why can't you engage them to help supplement government's effort?
That's an interesting DP. That's an interesting DP. But yeah, thanks. And actually, thanks to Martin and Davis, You guys are really the beacon of hope that we need, and you're the champions that we require, because you are showing that this can be done by the communities. We've supported our colleagues by providing PPEs that are branded DMMU, but at the same the government is ready to work with any citizens that wants to support the efforts. I mean, I should take this opportunity, surely, from the bottom of my heart, to thank our colleagues like Martin and Davis, who've really taken that initiative personal and are helping spread that this can be done by ourselves, the communities.
Doc, there is Brighton Future Mwava who says, Dr. Pollen, last week I saw DMMU in Chilanga, Midwest. What is the unit doing about the floods and the lack of a drainage system along the 7070 Midwest Road? Additionally, the people of Midwest lack access to safe and clean drinking water. Residents in this area drink water from shallow wells. We really appreciate the visitation by the DMMA in our area. You might want to respond to that one.
No. Thank you very much, Brighton, for that question. Indeed, you saw the DMMU on the ground, but you also appreciate that the Minister of Defense was on the ground. We had the generals from the Defense Forces on the ground, and it's a multi-sectoral approach that we've mounted. But you'd also appreciate that right now the government is taking clean drinking water to Middle West area there, where we've mounted a number of 10,000-liter water tanks and providing water on a daily basis. So on a daily basis right now in the hotspot areas, the government has a target of moving at least 2.4 million liters of water for people to use on a daily basis, at least 2.4 million, with a target of upscaling that to double to over 4 million liters of clean, fresh, and safe drinking water to different communities. Now, you appreciate also that the road on 77, the 7070 road itself in Middle West acts as a dam. It was built on higher ground, and the water which was coming from this side can't pass this, which was coming from that side, and can't let the outlets on the other side. So we're looking at ways that we can open up the road to allow the water to flow on the other side. But because of the unplanned development that has taken place there, you find that where the culvert is, there's a house, and therefore, even if you opened it up, it won't be able to go that side. So we're looking at ways that studying and assessing the different levels and help to channel the water to meander on these informal settlements that have been made there. But I should also mention that there are some structures that have been built literally on the drainages themselves. And these illegal structures will be brought down in order to ensure that we have we have proper drainages that can serve the people well. And we are also in that area providing chlorine and super chlorinating the shallow wells to ensure that people's lives and health are safeguarded.
This one is coming from Zambians and says the best solution is to replan and relocate people from more unplanned settlement. This situation needs more aggressive measure of revocation of Public Health Act, restrict movement to stop the spread of germ. Why are you not providing PPE for those going in community to educate the community?
We are providing PPEs for people who are engaging communities, but I think if community engagement is done at a platform where there's no need of a PPE, you don't want to be the only one wearing the PPEs when the communities you're engaging don't have PPEs themselves. But PPEs are being provided in risky spaces and risky areas. But essentially, I think what you've indicated there is one of the radical I'm not sure. Sorry, I lost you there. I lost you for a second. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can. I can hear you.
Okay. No, I was just indicating that the replanning and resettlement is one of the radical options that has been provided by the public. And in general, people feel that's one of the ways in which to proceed. And I think that is being seriously considered. And we'll be waiting for guidance from our superiors in terms of how we move in that direction, because it's not just a matter of waking up and getting those things done. The areas where that relocation is being proposed have to be properly planned And then there has to be a cost attachment to it, feasibility studies, and so forth and so on. But yeah, I agree that that might be one of the options to consider. I mean, even yesterday, candidly, one of the church elders and leaders indicated that some of these areas are not conducive for human habitation, and that's a bullet that we'll have to bite and see how we can work around that. But all those are under consideration and discussion.
This one is coming from Albert Monga, who says, I feel DMMU should always be upfront. That's why we call it disaster management. Doc, I encourage you to put in measures to avoid such disasters, unlike always waiting for a disaster to occur, then look for a solution to arrest the situation. It's a good thing having smart people like you, Doc, in that position. Please change the narrative of the work culture of DMMU. As I've suggested, we should always have problems of cholera that can be avoided. It's better we talk about earthquakes that are beyond us.
I think this is an encouragement from Albert. Is essentially imploring us to be proactive and to ensure that we can demonstrate that proactivity and avoid some of these things that are avoidable, with those things that are nature-based, basically, and we have no control over. I agree with you, and that's the approach we've taken. I mean, there are many things that we've prevented from happening, and the reason you have not seen or it has been quite successful. You'd also appreciate that the disaster management mitigation unit was heavily involved also in the response to anthrax, and so far so good. It's been contained, although there are pockets of reports here and there, but really we're trying within the context, and I appreciate that contribution.
There's Alfred Nshimbi who says, Luapula province, and to be specific, Kashikishi, gets supplied with dirty water from the water reticulation unit, such that if an outbreak of cholera was to come, nobody could be spared, although God forbid. So what's the plan, Doc, on this issue, which has been like a norm now, unfortunately for our province to be supplied us with contaminated water? I don't know if
Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for that, Alfred. Again, citizens are custodians of information and knowledge, and it's only right that we have this information. Our toll-free line at the Disaster Management Mitigation Unit is 909. Please do call us anytime just to give us information about any sorts of risks, hazards, and threats, and any disasters or any situation that you think puts any community in imminent danger. So this is news to me, and we'll immediately engage our colleague at the provincial administration to look into it. And I can assure you that the government will do everything possible to mitigate any risk in that regard.
Doc, what did you say was the toll line for DMMU?
909.
909. Perfect. So I'm going to flash that so that people can begin to use this line in case there is any need for attention, so people can make use of that. And that comes with this question from Kalumbu Samuzuza. What communication channels is DMM using to keep the public informed about the ongoing situation and necessary precautions?
All available options are being considered: social media, traditional media, and everything possible that the government can do. Print media, including this platform that we're using right now. This is an opportunity for us to engage the public. But also we are working on less traditional approach, community engagements through arts, and every platform necessary, and not just the DMMU. It's not the responsibility of the DMMU alone, it's the responsibility of everyone. We have a mantra at the Disaster Management Mitigation Unit. We say disaster management is everyone's responsibility. So we're calling upon you to help supplement and complement government efforts.
Thank you. This one is coming from Mateus Lungu, who said, Dr. Pollen, mine is on the reopening of schools, especially in risky areas of Lusaka, such as Mesisi, Compound, and Chaisa. What is DMMU doing to prepare local schools for a safe learning environment for both the learners and teachers?
The important thing is safety, occupational health and safety at the workplace, at the school themselves. But as humans, we can transport the vector, so we have to target it at source, and that's right in our communities, which is what we are doing. Provision of safe, clean, fresh drinking water, ensuring that public waste is removed, ensuring that we have clean and safe environments, and ensuring that hygiene message is sent in the communities themselves. By the time we're coming to the schools and gathering, we know that we would have dealt with the source itself.
This one is coming from Elijah Excellence Katuka, who says, Doc, one more. Do you intend to give us young brainy intellectual mandates or a challenge to provide or contribute with informed solution so we also feel involved? I'm so passionate about mitigating and solutions provision, especially in situations like cholera and COVID. There's a brainy young person there.
No, thank you very much. I think that's an important contribution. Really, this is about collective ownership and collective responsibility. The Ministry of Youth, Sport and Arts has been thinking around that, and I think you will see something very soon in the public in a way in which we innovatively engage persons such as yourself to contribute to the government agenda to eradicate the cholera.
Thank you very much, Doc. This one is coming from Nathaniel. We see the government doing a great job in ensuring the towns, especially, are kept clean, especially ensure that the town, especially the CBD, is supplied with beans through oftenly. It's a pity that one can move throughout town with no bin, which I know it's the people who steal and vandalize when these bins are stationed by government. Would you want to respond to that, Doc?
I think that's I mean, it's just basically a comment, and I think that's an observation that has been made here to say that the government does try. You clean, even today when you clean, you clean in the morning, you find there's refuse in the afternoon. So it's really about collective responsibility. We face challenges also in particular places where you want to do water reticulation, and you find that the water reticulation infrastructure is being stolen. Even right now, I think one of the challenges we're facing in these communities where we have set up water tanks, I think for your information, is that the water tank has been set up, and then there's some plumbing works that has been done where there are taps and people can draw water from the tanks. But right now, because of theft in those communities, you find that the taps are stolen in the night. So we have people now looking after those taps. You find the taps are taken out and then placed back in the night. So really, it's about community policing. It's about community responsibility and ensuring that we take that personal responsibility for some of these things.
This one is coming from Ida Sakala. Ida Sakala says, this is a fruitful discussion. I also feel collaborated efforts can help mitigate such crises. It can be done if we work together. As a city planner, I understand floods and cholera can be addressed if all practicing engineers come on board. Concerted effort with government and supplementing your efforts can go a long way. We need to map out all flood and cholera-prone areas. We need to deal with the issue from the core or roots, upgrading our unplanned settlements and rerouting some of our water ... Doc, any reaction to that?
No, I think it's just a contribution and observation, and actually very pretty insightful contribution made by Ida there to say that there's need to make use of all the assets that we have in the country, all the talents in our engineering field, to also think around replanning and upgrading of some of these areas, because in the current state, they're not conducive for human settlements, especially in this rainy season.
This one is coming from Wansa James. P.S. Thanks for this program. To our DMMU boss, Dr. Gabriel Pollen, we need to come up with a cholera vaccine. Engage people who can be working tirelessly in town, like what Mr. Martin Mlenga and Simon Mwewalen has been doing, but you're not motivating them. That's that's a challenge to your office, Doc?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the vaccine, as we've heard from the Ministry of Health, we have about 1.4 million doses that will be in the country in a matter of days. So obviously, most vulnerable populations at risk will be presented with these vaccines. So we're looking forward to that, and indeed, substantial appreciation extended to the corporate and partners of the government. But also, it's a demonstration of the able leadership of His Excellency the President, who's really demonstrated the commitment to fight the scourge of cholera. But in addition to that, I want to point out that we've engaged the colleagues that have been indicated there, and we continue to do so. The good part about it is that these are individuals who have taken it upon themselves to demonstrate that if they can do it, so can anybody else. So with no incentive at all. So that's an appreciation on our part as government to see that there are people who can be motivated without necessarily being incentivized, but also out of their own persuasion to have a clean city.
Perfect. So probably this one is coming from, I need to ask, but I think it's coming from Royman Kiamba, who says, Doc, what is government planning on doing to eradicate this problem for having cholera? Every year in and out, what measures is the government planning and doing starting now and going forward? I think this.
Thanks, Royman. Yeah, I think we've already responded to that, but I think the idea is to first of all understand that there are short-term measures, and for now, because people are at risk, we're giving them the support in terms of the clean water, in terms of the sanitation, and then also trying to deflood the areas where there's stagnant water, which really is the most conducive environment. But also long-term, there's issues around replanning, upgrading of these places, and potential resettlement in more conducive, properly planned places.
This is a question, I think, which is very important. Why do government always wait for a pandemic to strike for them to institute the sensitization to most affected areas? I think this is important because I think I remember you had responded to it. There are times that the government would want to say no street vending or ABCD before the rainy season, and then when a crisis hit, and then we forget those initiatives and interventions that government was pushing in, and we ask questions like this. But I would want you, Doc, to respond and just probably provide as necessary information as possible to our viewer then.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. This is not the first time that we're talking about this. Even the drainage works we've been doing that since the dry season, and sensitizing communities on the different public health threats. What you see is that the sensitization and response has only scaled up, not necessarily that it wasn't there. It's not coming from 0 to 1, but it's coming from maybe 5 to 10. Because there were steps that were taken, interventions that were made, but this is now making headline news, and that's why maybe you consistently keep hearing it. But the sensitization component has been going on. Even, for example, we've been talking about cassava brown streak disease. We've been talking about building standards, the blown-off roofs. We've been also sensitizing communities around the weather pattern and the appropriate crops to grow at the different points in time. So that's all ongoing.
Fiona Nsalamuka Nengwa says, what are you doing about Vishala in town? We see garbage in Lumumba and Freedom Way. Hello, it's rain season. I feel it's a huge risk.
I mean, I agree with Fiona here that it definitely is a huge risk. And as I indicated earlier, we have a pillar of solid waste management led by the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development. And it's an ongoing exercise right now. So it will take a bit of time, not a lot of time, but just a bit of time, because there are areas where you'd appreciate that the government has gone in and they removed this historical waste. So that's definitely going to be targeted, and that's going to be dealt with. But I agree that it is a risk.
This one is coming from Banken Banda, who says, Doc, in as much as your team in charge of disaster management working together with the Ministry of Health and all stakeholders coming on board to fight this disaster that has befallen us. I want to believe that this fight, or rather efforts, can't be properly appreciated if we keep living in the broken drainage systems, especially here in Lusaka. Now, here is the question. What initiatives or criteria are you putting in place to ensure that the drainage systems are taken care of?
Bank and Banda, that's an important question, and actually a contribution, because essentially what you're hazarding there is that there's needs to take care of the drainages, and that's one thing that the government is doing right now. We have already started. I mean, we've shared some images of places where drainage has been attended to. If you go to Chilanga Town Council, they'll tell you that they've received funding through the DMMU to address drainage disaster. If you go to Lusaka City Council, you hear the same story. But it's a question of scaling up resources and scaling up capacities in order to have a more simultaneous approach rather than sequential approach to dealing with these issues. But we will see that there will be incremental improvements that will aggregate over time into something much more meaningful and impactful.
This one is coming from Joanne Chira and says, thanks, Pilato and Dr. Pollen. What we need now is a long-term solution to this cholera crisis. And she says this from Twitter, or X for as it is now. And she says, what we need now is a long-term solution to this crisis.
Agreed. I mean, the long-term solution, I mean, you find that you won't hear of cholera cases in Ibex or Kabulonga. Why is that? Because these areas have been properly planned. And the residents of these areas, you find that have very good hygiene and sanitary conditions. So the idea is to bring every Zambian to that basic level of developmental ambition. And that's what the president really is pushing for in the developmental efforts of the country. As the country develops, you find that there are substantial improvements in housing, in schooling, many of those things, and you start to do away with those. So at the core of the initiative really is the president's drive towards a more developmental approach to all the problems that we're facing.
This one is coming from Boni Kaunda, who says, DMM, what is your remedy or solutions to cassava rotten in northern Muchinga and Luapula province? This is outside of cholera.
It's outside of cholera, but it's a very, very important question, because this is an area where we've intervened, and it's something I touched upon to say there's been cassava brown streak disease in these areas, which really is quite problematic, and we have supplied over 14,000 stems to at least 2,500 farmers across those places. And you see that the government has invested quite heavily there. We haven't given all the farmers, but we've given a good section of farmers, and we're already seeing results there in the sense that we managed to get fresh cuttings from one location and distributed did health education, did farming education, on good agronomics of cassava growing, and we're seeing that this is also part of the entire food security continuum and intervention that the government is putting in place. So just to indicate that the government is already on the ground and has provided training, has provided fresh cassava cuttings to different communities, and we'll see more of this on the market and be able to spread it out. But cassava brown streak disease is quite a notorious disease that is spread by the whitefly.
Thank you very much, Doc. This one is coming from Vicente, I don't know, from Mr. Stad, who says, thanks, PS. PS, thanks very much for this informative and educative program. Doc, we hear there is food shortage at the National Treatment Center for Cholera. Patients are making phone calls to outsiders to bring them food, yet food from communities is not allowed. Kindly confirm, is it true that there is food shortage? If yes, what is your immediate response to that?
I'm not aware of food shortages, because we have engaged a caterer that is providing at least 1,400 plates on a daily basis for all 3 meals. So that has been taken care of. Resources are available. So I don't think that's an issue right now. But I can confirm that a caterer has been engaged, and they are providing very, very healthy, balanced meals 3 times a day, at least 1,400 plates.
This one is coming from Emmanuel Inambao Katukula Ike, who says, "Good evening, Doc. How are you working with the Defense Ministry and local government ministry to combat cholera issue in Lusaka? And what measures are you putting to ensure that this does not occur again?" This question keeps coming, and I'm sure you have to respond to it a number of times.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I won't respond to the latter part of the question because I just responded to it 2 minutes ago, which is what we're doing to make sure it doesn't occur again. But maybe I should. And the idea is there are short-term measures, which is what we're doing right now, providing water and disinfecting places and providing chlorine as well as government. But also just to point out that there are long-term solutions, which is around replanning, upgrading, and potential resettlement should that be required. And I think that's the main crux of it. The defense forces, in terms of how we're working with them, they've deployed their various capacities in terms of equipment, but also manpower and skills. And these are being applied throughout the entire continuum of the operations. All the four or five pillars I've indicated there. In case management, there are defense forces there who are specialized in clinical care, but also the defense forces specialized in providing equipment for water and sanitation, as well as, so for example, Zambia National Service, we have the Land Development Department, we have the Builders Brigade on site as well, helping to install water tanks, to help also with the creation of new culverts in places where water drainages have been blocked. The defense forces are providing not just equipment, but manpower and skills in order to have a more robust response.
This one is coming from Felix Flexon Hangoma, who says, "Some pandemics are self-inflicted, or rather our own cause, as most citizens choose to ignore doing right towards having a healthy environment. Leaving people to stay in and plan settlement is also the highest cause of such. Once citizens start taking responsibility, then we'll fight cholera. I pray to see a better, clean Zambia." Very fruitful discussion. We should have most of these bona PS. Thank you very much. I do hope that we can have as many of these as possible. Doc, your thoughts on that particular contribution?
No, I mean, I think it's spot on. Essentially, what he's saying there is that, it's really a function of unplanned settlements, because you can juxtapose the public health threats on a planned settlement against an unplanned settlement, and you see that just across the road, people live very differently because of just the way in which places have been planned. But ultimately, that's a structural developmental challenge that has persisted over time, and is something that the leadership of His Excellency the President is really trying to confront head on, which is to raise the basic living standards of the average Zambian by provision of the basic education, the basic healthcare services, and opportunities within the economy that can then allow people to upgrade their living conditions.
This one is coming from Kango Moon, who says, "The problem we face in these CBDs, which is Central Business Districts, I assume, is that people are very irresponsible. They are scared of the disease, but are not willing to do what is right. I think there should be stiff punishment for these offenders." Your thoughts on that, Doc?
I agree, Kango Moon. I agree that it's really what you're pointing out essentially is taking it as personal and collective responsibility. Once the government is doing something about it, ask yourself, what am I doing to help the government? What am I doing to contribute to this scourge, in addressing and combat this scourge? And on the other hand, there's also, the public itself is the first to resist. Like you rightly pointed out, if it's not raining, you find that street vending is normalized, and then suddenly it becomes a government problem. But we need to look at things quite differently and appreciate that we are all partners, and we all aim to live in a better Zambia.
This one comes from Paul Cruz, who says, why are we rushing for vaccines and not the core issue, which is sanitation? He's texting and following us from Twitter. And Doc, your response to that. And I think we should be...
Paul, thanks for that. Paul, thanks for that. Just to point out that it's not necessarily rushing for vaccines. As you know, the issue of sanitation is what is currently being addressed even before the vaccines hit our shelves. The main issue that we're addressing now, which is what we understand, is that the underlying cause are the sanitary conditions in these different places. And we are trying to help by ensuring that people are given the dignity that they deserve by having access to clean, fresh, and safe drinking water, but also to empty the pit latrines, to bury the shallow wells, to super chlorinate them, and to ensure that they get some relief in areas that are highly flooded and have stagnant water.
This one is coming from Mr. Alex K. Nyirenda, who says, Dr. Pollen, thanks for the effort the DMMU is doing. I understand the replanning process is long term, but has this been proposed, including in Parliament? Because I believe huge financial muscles is needed for such projects to be implemented.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, very, very spot on that. Substantial resources would be required for replanning, but also for upgrading of some of these peri-urban areas where most of our residents live. So substantial resources. But ultimately, as I've indicated, it's a complex developmental challenge. And as we move towards the path to economic recovery and exponential growth, we'll see that new areas will be mushrooming and springing up in different parts of the country where we expect new residents to come up, and we'll have better planning in those areas as the country upgrades and the living standards of our people improve.
Last question, Doc. I think we need to be closing. Last question is coming from Pastor David Situngu, who is obviously following up on the food question. So he says, P.S. the question on food that Vincent asked is really serious and would be an embarrassment if such is going on. Please, Doc, follow up so that people don't keep patients at home and increase the chance of their pandemic growing. I think Pastor is
Thank you very much for that question, Pastor David. I think I'd address that by saying that a caterer has been engaged, but we will ensure that this is something that we'll follow up, and we'll be able to give some feedback through a different platform, but we will definitely follow it up.
All right, Doc, I think we'll end there. I'll ask you to share your concluding remarks and thoughts so we can say bye to our viewers with your concluding remarks.
Now, thank you so much for having me here, P.S. Pilato. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the people and the opportunity to engage the public more broadly. But to say that this conversation doesn't stop here, it's an ongoing conversation. This country is ours. This is the land that God has given us, so let's take care of it. And just to remind everyone that disaster management is everyone's responsibility. And with that, I say good night.
Doc, so there's Innocent Jones Mumba who is begging that I read his comments. Please allow me to. And then your response will be the conclusion.
I'll have to end with disaster management is everyone's responsibility again.
Doc, evening. My first concern is, don't we have the capacity to be a plastic-free society? Secondly, is please take time and observe that most of the drainages around Lusaka are nicely done, but don't have a direction for the flow of water out of the communities and CBD. There is a lot to be done by local government in terms of resettlement planning, increasing funding for the councils, and more empowerment projects for the citizenry. I think that's a very important submission. And I think, Doc, you can respond to that, and then we can close the program.
It is an important submission. It's a submission that we've seen from different platforms, the idea of a plastic-free country, because we see that most of of the refuse, of most of the garbage, most of the pollution, the solid waste pollution we see around is because of the irresponsibility on our parts as members of community in discarding properly of the plastic waste. So, I mean, I look forward to a situation like that as well. And let's see how things go. But I can say that there's more good things to come. The commitment at the highest level, at the level of the presidency, including the office in which I sit, in the office of the vice president, one of the vice president herself, there's been substantial commitment to ensure that, we move in that direction. But importantly, the issue of drainages is also being seriously looked into, and it's a matter of having funds available and ensuring that these funds are deployed in that channel. So in closing, I want to remind everyone once again that disaster management is everyone's responsibility. Good night.
Thank you very much, Doc. And we say good night to those that are watching us in Zambia and in time zones where it's night. And those that are watching us in different time zones, we say thank you very much. We'll catch you next week when we have another guest. And we hope that we'll be able to invite you, Doc, to join us again when the need arises. Thank you very much. And thank you for tuning in. Catch you next week.